Howdy! Today I'm going to be talking about The Sound of Waves by Yukio Mishima. This is the first Mishima I have read, though I have been fascinated by him for a number of years now. Certainly one of the most interesting Wikipedia pages you're like to come across. Definitely look into what he and his buddies were up to on November 25th, 1970. A figure that has, I believe for good reason, drawn a lot of controversy and discussion over his ideology and the legacy that he left. Now, I had initially intended to first read The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea, which was recommended to me by my buddy Adam. Thank you, by the way, for the tip about the microphone. But The Sound of Waves was the only copy of any of Mishima's works that my library district had on hand. If I were to try to read something else first, I would have had to get it through interlibrary loan, and timing those things out nearly isn't as easy as it is with my home library stuff, so I thought I would start here. It seems to me to be a pretty straightforward entry point, one that I think maybe in its directness and simplicity might not really represent the full powers of Mishima. I don't know, I can't say for certain, though I do intend to read a lot more of his works. I've also seen the film by Paul Schrader, Life in 4 Chapters, which I actually think is pretty overrated. Maybe once I've read more of Mishima's works will that film get better in my mind. It's a very strange film for sure, not one I hate or anything, but one that just left me feeling empty. The Sound of Waves accounts a love story between a young boy and girl, Shinji and Hatsue, living on the island of Utajima. The girl who has recently moved to the island and has been taken in by the lighthouse keeper. The echoes of World War II coloring both of their lives in sort of tragic ways that make us very sympathetic to them. Shinji is a very simple character, someone who is in deep accord with nature. He's a fisherman trying to support his mother and younger brother after the death of his father, which is accounted in really grisly detail in a flashback chapter. It doesn't really feel super explicit, but there's definitely something of an apprehension for Western influence and the sort of big city lifestyle that are drawing more and more people away to pursue capitalist ideals and materialism. There's a moment early on in the book where Shinji visits an old target observation tower, and there's another sequence later on when he visits Unten on a shipping vessel. They see the destruction that America wreaked on the landscape. It persists as a physical and psychological scar on Japan. The backdrop of The Sound of Waves, the island of Utajima, is really integral to its use of symbolism and metaphor. The title is very fluid in its meaning and changes given the context of any certain scene, but it seems to be arguing for the simplistic way of life that the islanders lead, despite the poverty that afflicts them. The houses that they live in are permeated with the smell of the bathroom. Simple things like Shinji's mother having a comb that has a lot of teeth missing that she can't afford to replace. They have to work very hard to get by. The mother is a pearl diver, and the account of her diving to the bottom of the sea to retrieve whatever she can, her feet kind of getting cut up on the jagged rocks, and the pressure of the ocean bearing down on her as she's losing her breath. Those were pretty startling scenes. The material conditions of their life really drive the story. It is community that allows people to thrive and find meaning in this world. The island only has one spring that is capable of producing drinkable water, and so the families on the island have organized a schedule where every hour they can go and send somebody to get water. And this schedule rotates so that nobody has to have the same exact time every single day. Everyone knows everyone else on the island. Everyone is very friendly. No one has any locked doors or anything. Theft is not really even a concept. Shinji is often running errands for various people just out of the natural friendliness and helpfulness at the core of his character. I'm in the middle of a nonfiction work right now that I really should just finish. It's very short, it's very good, it's very illuminating, and it's called Ikigai, which is a Japanese term that kind of bundles together 4 different value systems that define kind of what your purpose is in life. A key component of it being what you can do to help the world. There's a certain island cluster in Japan that has, or at least had, I believe it might have changed since the book was published in I think 2016 or 17. One of the highest concentrations of people who have lived to be over 100, and part of that has to do with diet, but part of it is simply the sense of meaning that the people who live there have, and it is because of the environment that they live in that they have this purpose. An island setting demands of its people that they all play a part in helping their little village thrive. And characters who are in discord with that are painted as either lost and confused and frustrated, like this one girl Chiyoko, or like the antagonist, I guess, of the novel Yasuo, him having kind of been like seduced by life on the mainland and the city, who treats sex as something of a conquest and as something that really has very little to do with romantic love. He owns an expensive watch and comes from a wealthy family and is kind of propped up as a suitor for Hatsue. This drives a lot of the conflict of the story. Yasuo tries to assault Hatsue and is thwarted by this hornet who keeps stinging him. Another thing that paints Yasuo as being a counterpoint to Shinji, someone who is out of sync with the natural world, and thus it seems to like attack him. It deprived us of what could have been like a really nasty scene, and it does actually work towards the themes of the novel. The use of nature in this book is like a really constant element. Hatsue and Shinji are like almost detrimentally sympathetic, I feel. Hatsue's mother and brother dying paints her in sort of a tragic way. Shinji, having lost his father, has had to grow up very early. This is also something of a coming of age story, having to take on more responsibility. Clearly, Shinji is propped up as the good guy because he is so helpful and resourceful. He is very physically strong. He, in a particularly harrowing sequence, is able to, in the middle of a typhoon, tie a lifeline around this buoy to keep the Utajima Maru tethered to another boat so that the two of them don't capsize in the middle of this storm. It is really how one-dimensional Shinji and Hatsue are that kind of deprived the story of a lot of internal, like, psychological depth. Their love is pitched in almost this sort of like Romeo and Juliet kind of like tragic lens where they can't be together for a large stretch of the story. And that's why I think Chiyoko or Shinji's mother, who I wish had a name, were probably my favorite characters. Characters who did have flaws and made mistakes. Chiyoko being a girl who had this perception of herself as being very unattractive. There's a really great way that Mishima describes her like neurosis, kind of keeping her from actually developing self-preoccupied virginity. Shinji's mother was also one of my favorite characters. Her struggle for meaning after the death of her husband, her boys growing up and kind of approaching the age where they won't be at home. The reality that a lot of mothers in sort of a traditional social setting in the period that the book is set probably had to face. Her attempts to unite Shinji with his love, despite it meaning that he will be parted from her, were very moving to me. And also how she has to function as a breadwinner in the family. Reading the scenes where she's diving for pearls was pretty exciting, and I wish that we had gotten maybe a bit more dignity for the character. She should have had a name. The nature of the melodrama of The Sound of Waves, I wonder if it is Mishima making something of a social critique. The nature of gossip because of the machinations of the village community. The problem kind of gets blown out of proportion. Weirdly hypocritical to me because Shinji describes one of his old school teachers as having gotten like one of the other school teachers pregnant, and he still had a really good reputation with all of the mothers in the village. I just wondered why people were just ostracizing Shinji and Hatsue for their proposed tryst. How the love story resolves, I also felt kind of frustrated with. Shinji's mother tries to help him and Hatsue get together by talking to Hatsue's father, Terakichi, being really overprotective of his daughter. There's this monologue at the end where Terakichi reveals, like, it was my plan all along to try to get Hatsue and Shinji together. I was angry at first, but then after I made them stop seeing each other, Hatsue became so out of sorts that I decided things couldn't go on that way. So I decided on a plan. I gave Shinji and Yasuo berths on my ship and told the captain to watch and see which one of them made the best showing. I let the captain tell all this to Jukichi as a secret, and I don't suppose Jukichi has told Shinji even yet. Jukichi's like Shinji's old boss on the octopus boat that he was working on before this scene. Well, anyway, to make a short story of it, the captain really fell in love with Shinji and decided I'd never be able to find a better husband for Hatsue. And then when Shinji did that great thing at Okinawa, well, I changed my mind too and decided he was the one for my girl. The only thing that really counts, here Terakichi raised his voice emphatically, the only thing that really counts in a man is his get up and go. If he's got get up and go, he's a real man. And those are the kind of men we need here on Utajima. Family and money are all secondary. Don't you think so, Mistress Lighthouse Keeper? And that's what he's got, Shinji. get up and go. While I don't believe this statement is entirely in discord with the rest of the themes that Mishima presents in the novel, like, yes, the reason why Shinji and Hatsue can't be with one another is because they're both so young, so Shinji facing some sort of big responsibility, I guess could be a way for him to prove his mettle and prove their love together, but to me it seems to actually get away from their love at the same time. It is this prioritization of Shinji's general competence for being a man, not really even so much what Hatsue does, who feels very helpless. There's another line at the end of the book that leaves something of a sour dose of like realism in my mouth. The boy flashed his beautiful teeth in a smile. Then, from the breast pocket of his shirt, he took out the snapshot of Hatsue and showed it to her. Hatsue touched the picture lightly with her own hand and then returned it. Her eyes were full of pride. She was thinking it was her picture that had protected Shinji, but at this moment Shinji lifted his eyebrows. He knew it had been his own strength that had tided him through that perilous night. We're not really leaving on a very, romantic sentiment. You know I love you, babe, but I'm just strong. You didn't do anything. Yes, it does feed into Mishima's central theme, but it's just like a sentiment that I find really flat, and I kind of disagree with it. It's kind of like a might makes right sort of deal. If you're able to accomplish things and make your labor worthwhile, then you deserve to be in love. Reflected in the fact that the romance is so very picturesque. I was really on board with a lot of the sentiment of the story and thought that it would do something kind of dynamic to test the love of the main characters insofar as they relate to one another as people. It was much more simple in an unsatisfying way than I expected it would be. I thought, given Mishima's reputation, that there would be something maybe a little bit more transgressive. It's frustrating to me though, because Mishima is capable of writing some romantic sequences. There's a very, very romantic scene during a storm where Shinji takes shelter in this abandoned house and builds a fire and falls asleep and sees Hatsue undressing before him, and then they both get naked. And it's very sensual in a very sort of pure way. There's nothing particularly indulgent about it either. The two characters don't even have sex. It feels almost like the Garden of Eden. And there are a lot of really beautiful descriptions in the book. I must stress that. The reason why I read this as quickly as I did, despite the overall arc of the story feeling played out and ordinary to me, was because the writing was so excellent, efficient, while also being able to communicate poetic meaning. I don't think it's an incredibly deep book and that its comments are really revelatory or anything, but the actual writing Mishima is capable of is really impressive. There's also just a ton of really great metaphors he uses, like when Shinji is going to visit the graveyard to visit his father. It describes the tombstones as sails on sailboats that have anchors that are so deep that they can't move. I thought that was a really moving and beautiful way to tribute the residents of a graveyard. The synergy of setting and theme I thought were really excellent. It's the actual story, the characters, and the writing that kind of suffered. There were a couple moments of humor that I found to be pretty effective. Shinji's younger brother, who he's supporting because of course he's a very self-sacrificing character, sends his brother on a school field trip to the mainland, and halfway through his trip his brother sends them a postcard, spending their mother's money to just send them a postcard, even though he's going to be back on the island in a couple of days to tell them how it's going. There's this really funny moment where he and his friends are going to a movie and they're sitting on the chairs, but they haven't been folded over yet, so they're sitting on the very top and they're really tall in front. Some other dude in the audience is hey, sit down, you can fold those chairs. Them being unfamiliar with that was very cute. So there was a lot to like about The Sound of Waves. There are definitely worse books I have read this year, and there are books that I enjoyed more than this but that weren't written nearly as well. Would I recommend The Sound of Waves though? If you're really fixated on Mishima, he really is a very controversial and fascinating figure. I think you should probably go in on this. I don't know if it was the best place for me to start. From what I hear, this is easily one of his least prolific books. Maybe it's because this was one of the earlier novels that he wrote. It didn't seem to me to be a story that really kind of captured the right-wing volatile beliefs that he took on later on. There is a lot of debate as to whether or not Mishima's ideology was totally authentic and how much of it was performance. I don't really regret having read it, but I really wouldn't strongly recommend it to anyone either. I think that the strength of the writing does give it a slight edge. It was perfectly adequate. I want to apologize. I don't think from here on these releases are going to be consistent at all. I'm probably going to be skipping uploads on weeks throughout the rest of the year. I don't think I'm going to come remotely close to the goal I initially had, but I'm going to keep going, see what I can do. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.